The Trump administration has warned Canada that it would be foolish to think it would win a trade war with the U.S.
Transport Secretary Sean Duffy said a prolonged trade fight would have, quote, devastating impact on Canada. His comment follows the collapse of trade negotiations on Friday, but predicted Prime Minister Mark Carney would return to the negotiating table very, very quickly. Mr. Duffy said Ottawa gets the benefit of trading with Washington way more than the other way round.
The Washington slaps new U.S. tariffs of 50% and around $20 billion worth of Canadian goods after talks yielded no deal. The levies affect roughly 5% of Canada's exports to the U.S. And Canada responded with plans for dollar duties on American goods beginning September 8th. It said it will target a range of U.S. sectors, including steel, dairy, and electronics.
Mr. Carney accused Washington of making last-minute demands that Canada could not accept, including restrictions on its ability to strike trade deals with other countries. He called the U.S. terms a bad deal, saying Washington had asked too much and offered too little.
Well, President Donald Trump accused Canada of wanting the benefits of being an American state without being one. He accused Ottawa of charging U.S. farmers levies for many years, saying this can no longer go on.
And for more insights, Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Hinrich Foundation, joins us from Singapore. Dr. Elms, always good to see you. So both sides, gave very different accounts for why talks collapsed. We have autos, we have dairy, we have whiskey, we have who Canada can talk to, and even language that came in very quickly. Do you have a sense of what the actual reason was?
I think it's the package, actually. It's not one specific issue. It's the range of issues. It's the language that's being used by the Trump administration and the sensitivity of some of those areas, particularly things around cars, trucks, dairy, lumber, et cetera, which are very important to Canada, also important to the United States. And at the end of the day, the two sides simply couldn't get past this large set of disagreements.
And Mr. Carney is now promising dollar-for-dollar retaliation. Dr. Elms, who can tolerate the economic pain longer, do you think? And what will they ultimately agree to in order to stop it?
That is the question that everyone is asking. I think the challenge here is that, of course, these Canadian tariffs are not currently paid by Canadians. They'll be paid by Americans and American companies importing from Canada. So they're going to hit Americans rather than Canadians, although obviously Canada will have a much harder time, if at all possible, to export to the United States. At 50% tariffs, that completely ruins your profit margins. If Canada retaliates, now you're putting additional pain on Canadians who are trying to import goods from the United States. I mean, the bottom line is that nobody wins in this kind of tariff-for-tariff trade war.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Elms, the other question I suspect that many leaders around the world have is whether or not this is going to widen beyond Canada. Mark Carney held fast on Canada's dairy industry, for example. Japan, Korea, other economies of this part of the world have their own protected farm sectors as well. So is agriculture going to be the next U.S. target in Asia, or is it going to be different?
I don't think it's going to be agriculture, but I do think that one of the problems that Canada had is that they could not accept a provision the United States is demanding that says that the United States gets a veto over what other parties that you do trade with, most notably China. And the problem for the rest of Asia is that many of those similar clauses are already embedded in trade deals, bilateral trade deals signed by Malaysia, Cambodia, Indonesia. They're also on the table in discussions that are still ongoing with Vietnam, Thailand, and so forth. And so I think the question for many Asian partners is, well, wait a minute, if Canada can say no to those provisions, then are we allowed to say no to those provisions? And if we are required to adjust our trade policies based on the whims of Washington, then that's also problematic for us. So I think if I was an Asian government, I would be watching this Canadian dispute very carefully, both because of the rules, especially around third-party trade, transshipment, et cetera, but also because the United States used a very weird trade tool this time, Section 338, which came from 1930 when it actually triggered the Great Depression. that new trade tool could be on the table in Washington, and that would be deeply problematic for Asia because it allows the president on a whim to increase tariffs now to up to 50% with no process, no procedure, no approval, simply because he's decided that it should be so. That is very alarming, I think, for Asian governments and certainly for Asian companies.
And do you expect Section 338 to be used against? I mean, if you had to decide which Asian economy is most at risk of Section 338, which economy would it be here in Asia?
If I had to guess, given Trump's obsession with bilateral trade deficits, the country most in crosshairs is actually Vietnam, where they don't have a bilateral trade deal yet signed because of continuing disagreements, but where the trade deficit in manufactured goods is very high. And if you were Trump and you were looking to make an example of somebody in Asia, then I would say Vietnam is at risk. Because, again, the trade deficit is high. They do a lot of trade with China. There's a lot of arguments about transshipment at the moment. And so I would be increasingly nervous. And Vietnam's ability to do a Canada, to sort of stand up and say, no, we will not accept this, is much more limited than Canada's ability to stand up to the United States.
Dr. Elms, the Canadians have been trying to diversify their trade. We know that they've been doing more with EU and already seeing that thaw in its economic relationship with China. Is Washington accelerating that shift? And could that ultimately weaken U.S. influence over Canada?
For sure. I mean, I think one of the problems for Canada and their diversification plan has been if your largest market, which is the United States and then Mexico, allows you free trade for decades, then when you get told to diversify, you have to say as a company, like, why? Why would I diversify? I know these people, they know me, we've had a great relationship. I'm not diversifying. But when you suddenly have a 50% tariff imposed overnight, then all of a sudden, a lot of firms in Canada are going to say, actually, maybe now we should take this diversification push seriously. We should look for where else can we sell things like honey and hockey sticks and wooden furniture and all sorts of stuff. And I think you will see an acceleration away from the U.S. market at a level that we had not anticipated, certainly not 2 years ago.
I'm trying to get, a sense of how quick this shift is going to take place. We know that Singapore and ASEAN have been leaning on CPTPP, on RCEP and so forth. So diversify away, from the US has been a goal, but right now, is it still more rhetoric than reality?
I think it has been, but again, I think a 50% tariff concentrates the mind in a way that a sort of broad discussion about why you should change your policies doesn't really focus your attention. So I think this 50% tariff, even for sectors that are not currently affected, will push firms to say, wait a second, there's other parts of the world. Canada's been working, for example, on an agreement with ASEAN that is due to come into force relatively soon. A lot of Canadian companies, I think, will suddenly sit up and say, actually, we should take that seriously. Let's look at what would it take for us? What would it cost? How long will it take? What kind of opportunities do we have in markets that we had not previously explored?
So who do you think will benefit most from this trend? Is it China?
That's a great question. I'm not certain at the moment. It could be that Mexico actually does well out of this. If you diversify away from Canada, then there may be more imports coming into the U.S. from Mexico. I don't know. I think this is early days yet to decide who would be a winner out of this ongoing trade spat between the U.S. and Canada. In part, it depends on how long this continues. Both sides seem to be digging in for what I expect is going to be longer than anticipated period here. I don't see us sort of ending this week with some kind of resolution on U.S.-Canada. So the longer it continues, the harder it is for you to imagine what the outcome will be, because there's a lot of unanticipated consequences. So how many Canadian firms pivot? How many firms that would have invested in the United States, for example, will now delay that investment in the United States, may put it in Canada, may look elsewhere altogether? I think we can't say until we've seen what is the extent of this trade spat and then what is the level of damage that causes.
We will continue to watch this story. Dr. Elm, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Hinrich Foundation.